Stotara Srimad Bhagavatam Goswami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Satashi Srimad Savangay Srila Bhakti Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada ki jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai. Prem Jagavu Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana ki jai. Shri Shri Vrindavan Dhamma ki jai. Shri Navadvip Dham ki jai. Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai. Shri Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki jai. Tulsi Devi ki jai. Bhakti Devi ki jai. Gangamaya ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam Naraskricham Naram Chaivam Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayat Mudirayat Nasta Parayusha Abhadresha Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shlokir Bhakti Ravati Naishtiki. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Second canto, chapter 5, text 33. Is that what's on the board? Yes. Tada samhatya chanyonyam Bhagavat Shakti Charita Sarasvata Muda Padaya Tobayam Sasrijir Yadaha Tada samhatya chanyonyam Bhagavat Shakti Charita Sarasvatam Ubadaya Chabayam Sasrijur Yadaha Tada, all those. Hammatya, being assembled. Cha, also. Anyonyam, one another. Bhagavat, by the personality of Godhead. Shakti, energy. Choditaha, being applied. Sarasvatam, primarily and secondarily. Ubadaya, accepting. Cha, also. Ubayam, both. Satsrijuhu, came into existence. He, certainly. Adaha, this universe. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Thus, when all these became assembled by force of the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this universe certainly came into being by accepting both the primary and secondary causes of creation. Responsibly, thus, when all these became assembled by force of the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this universe certainly came into being by accepting both the primary and secondary causes of creation. Purport. In this verse, it is clearly mentioned that the Supreme Personality of Godhead exerts his different energies in the creation. It is not that he himself is transformed into material creations. He expands himself by his different energies, as well as by his plenary portions. In a corner of the spiritual sky of Brahmajyoti, a spiritual cloud sometimes appears, and the covered portion is called Mahatattva. The Lord then, by his plenary portions as Mahavishnu, lies down within the water of the Mahatattva, and the water is called the causal ocean, Karana Jala. While Mahavishnu sleeps within the causal ocean, innumerable universes are generated along with his breathing. These universes are floating, and they are scattered all over the causal ocean. They stay only during the breathing period of Mahavishnu. In each and every universal globe, the same Mahavishnu enters again as Garbhodakshayi Vishnu and lies there on the serpent-like Sesha incarnation. From his navel sprouts a lotus stem and on the lotus, Brahma, the Lord of the universe, is born. Brahma creates all forms of living beings in different shapes in terms of different desires within the universe. He also creates the sun, moon, and other demigods. Therefore, the chief engineer of the material creation is the Lord himself, as confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 9:10. It is he only who directs the material nature to produce all sorts of moving and non-moving creations. There are two modes of material creation: the creation of the collective universes, as stated above, done by Mahavishnu, and the creation of the single universe. Both are done by the Lord, and thus the universal shape, as we can see, takes place. Thus, translation, thus when all these became assembled by force of the energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this universe certainly came into being by accepting both the primary and secondary causes of creation. Mukam karoti vachalam pangam langayate girim yat kripa tarham bande Sri Guru Dinatanane. The universe, as we see it, either with the naked eye or through telescopes, is very broad and very big and expansive indeed, difficult to comprehend. Almost everybody is awed by the number of glittering stars in the sky at night. It's very difficult to ascertain the cause of all these things, although sometimes people want to know what is the cause of all these things. Learned scholars in different parts of the world try to ascertain the nature of the universe. Great scientists, great scholars, great philosophers have tried over centuries to understand the nature of the universe without any one single notion. It seems that the paradigms change from year to year, from decade to decade, from century to century. Just as at one time the particles of matter were said to be what scientists called phlogiston, and then later on they determined they were molecules and atoms. So it's very difficult to understand the nature of existence by scientific endeavor. In Chaitanya Bhagavat, the city of Navadvip is described as the great scholarly bastion of the universe. Nowadays, people think that places like Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard are those places. But in those days, 500 years ago, Navadvip was very popular as a place of learning. And the people thought that they were very atheistic originally. And they thought that some were worshipping Saraswati, the goddess of learning. They thought that they could arrive at a semblance of truth by becoming very learned in scholarly activities. And it was common that there were debates. According to Chaitanya Bhagavat, there were debates, and people who were successful were like stars. The debates in Navadvip were something like the sporting events. People who were great scholars were like great sports stars. There was a person that we read about in Chaitanya Chaitamrita, Digvijaya, who at one time came to Navadvip. And he was such a famous scholar that he had traveled all over that part of the world, the South Asian province of India, and been sort of a conquering hero, like a great sports star, like someone like, who was it, Beckham or somebody like that, who's a very famous football player. But this person had many elephants and horses and chariots and a big entourage that went with him. So he was a very, very great scholar. And according to Chaitanya Bhagavat, he engaged in, when he came to Navadvip, people were in awe of this great scholar. And his mission was to be presented a paper saying that he had defeated all the scholars of Navadvip, which was a very famous city of scholars. And then he would have achieved the ultimate goal of his life. He was a very famous person, and when he encountered Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was then only a teenager, teaching grammar and not revealing who he really was, he was soundly defeated. And I think in Chaitanya Charitamrita it explains the actual verses where Lord Chaitanya found fault in the scholar. He was asked to recite the glories of Mother Ganges, and something like 2 or 3 hours elapsed before he finally finished composing his poetry on the Mother Ganges. But somehow or other, Chaitanya, who was just a young man teaching grammar, was found faults in his presentation. And he was just totally amazed that a young person who was only teaching grammar, barely a grammarian, and it's said that it takes something like 10 years of studying 8 hours a day just to master the grammar of the Sanskrit language. So he was kind of like dumbfounded. He couldn't answer Lord Chaitanya's questions. And then according to Chaitanya Bhagavat, he went, and Lord Chaitanya didn't want to humiliate or embarrass him, even though he was doing that. His students all began to laugh at the fact that the scholar was kind of dumbfounded, and Lord Chaitanya forbade them to laugh, and because he wanted to preserve the dignity of this man. And he said to him, "Come back tomorrow after you've had a bit of a rest, and we'll again debate." So it was kind of left at that. And then, according to Chaitanya Bhagavat, this man had a dream that night that his worshipful deity, who was Saraswati Devi, the goddess of learning, spoke with him, and she revealed that he was actually defeated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Chaitanya being that person. And he hadn't revealed this to anyone in Navadvip. And she told him that that's the reason that you were defeated. And so that's the reason. And if you reveal what I've said to you, you will be killed immediately. This is a very private and confidential bit of information I'm giving to you. So the scholar went back the following day, according to Chaitanya Bhagavat, and apologized to Lord Chaitanya for his very arrogant attitude, and he had a bit of a conversation with Lord Chaitanya, and he realized that he had done something that was actually offensive, and he gave away all of his wealth, his chariots, his elephants, his horses, and his entourage, and everything, and became a great devotee. I don't know if he was initiated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he employed a lot of humility. And Lord Chaitanya said, now that you've spoken, now that you've realized what the truth of the matter is, I want you to keep this completely secret and private. And if you do otherwise, I promise you that you will be killed. So that was that story. And it actually happened that way. The people of Navadvip, they admired Lord Chaitanya for his scholarship. They didn't know he was the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they admired him greatly for his clarity and his ability to defeat almost everyone he came in contact with. And some of them even said to him that if you could apply all this knowledge in the service of Lord Krishna, you would be perfect, and then I would worship you forever. And they didn't realize who he was because he didn't reveal who he was. And it is said in many shastras that the Lord can only be known if he chooses to reveal himself. He can't, it's also stated in the Bhagavad Gita, he can't be known by scholarship, he can't be known by meditation. He can only be known when he himself decides to reveal who he is to others. So this was the situation. And we noticed that in Prabhupada's life, writing books and scholarship was very important. Sometimes he would stay up at night and arise early in the morning at 1 or 2 o'clock, and everyone was sound asleep, and would write books because he knew that this knowledge was very important. And he had several times said that his only worry was that people weren't reading his books very carefully, even though he worked very hard to make them perfect. And when he encountered scholars in the West, he indirectly criticized them. He was saying, well, I've found certain mistakes in what you've written, but you won't find any mistakes in what I've written. So in a way, he was very arrogant about his scholarship. And Lord Chaitanya was almost known as the personification, of arrogance among the Navadvip people, because he refused to be defeated, and when he ever encountered devotees, he would defeat and humiliate them, so that he was impossible to defeat. One of the most important verses that I've encountered is the Savai Pumsam Paro Dharmo Yaktir Adhoksajay Hoitaki Apratiyata Yayat Mam Supersediti. This is very important because it shows that Krishna consciousness is not a fixed religion like Hinduism or Muslimism or Islam, Christianity, Judaism or Buddhism or anything like that. But it's based upon devotional service, based upon love of God. And this is written in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And if you will indulge me, I'll read what Prabhupada said about this verse in the purport. The verse is Savai Pumso Parodharmo Yaktir Bhaktir Hosaje Hoitakia Pratiyatayat Mam Supersediti. And the translation is that the supreme occupation, Dharma, for all humanity is that by which men can attain to loving service unto the transcendent Lord. Such devotional service must be unmotivated and uninterrupted to completely satisfy the self. And in the purport, Prabhupada writes, in this statement, Sutta Goswami answers the first question of the sages of Naimisharanya. The sages asked him to summarize the whole range of revealed scriptures and present the most essential part so that the fallen people, or the people in general, might easily take it up. The Vedas prescribe 2 different types of occupation for the human being. One is called Pravritti Marga, or the path of sense enjoyment, and the other is called Nivritti Marga, or the path of renunciation. The path of enjoyment is inferior, and the path of sacrifice for the supreme cause is superior. The material existence of the living being is a diseased condition of actual life. Actual life is spiritual existence, or Brahma Bhuta, as described in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.330.20, existence, where life is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. Material existence is temporary, illusory, and full of miseries. There is no happiness at all. There is just the futile attempt to get rid of the miseries, and temporary cessation of misery is falsely called happiness. Therefore, the path of progressive material enjoyment, which is temporary, miserable, and illusory, is inferior. But devotional service to the Supreme Lord, which leads one to eternal, blissful, and all-cognizant life, is called the superior quality of occupation. This is sometimes polluted when mixed with inferior quality. For example, adoption of devotional service for material gain is certainly an obstruction to the progressive path of renunciation. Renunciation, or abnegation, for ultimate good, is certainly a better occupation than enjoyment in the diseased condition of life. Such enjoyment only aggravates the symptoms of disease and increases its duration. Therefore, devotional service to the Lord must be pure in quality, that is, without the least desire for material enjoyment. One should therefore accept the superior quality of occupation in the form of devotional service to the Lord, without any tinge of unnecessary desire, fruitive action, or philosophical speculation. This alone can lead one to perpetual solace in his service. We have purposely denoted dharma as occupation because the root meaning of the word dharma is, quote, that which sustains one's existence, end quote. The living being's sustenance of existence is to coordinate his activities with his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord Krishna. Krishna is the central pivot of living beings, and he is the all-attractive living entity or eternal form amongst all living beings or eternal forms. Each and every living being has his eternal form in the spiritual existence, and Krishna is the eternal attraction for all of them. Krishna is the complete whole, and everything else is his part and parcel. The relation is one of the servant and the served. It is transcendental and is completely distinct from our experience in material existence. The relation of servant and served is the most confidential form of intimacy. One can realize it as devotional service progresses. Everyone should engage himself in that transcendental loving service of the Lord, even in the present conditional state of material existence. That will gradually give one the clue to actual satisfaction. That's verse in the first canto, second chapter, number 6. When Prabhupada's translation of, in his purport, when he says the relation of servant and the served is the most confidential form of intimacy, this is like a panacea for all the ills of human society that we experience. Generally, people are envious of one another, and it's a nature, just human nature, to feel upstaged or envious of people who are wealthier or more prominent or better scholars than we are. But as Prabhupada says, the relationship between the servitor and the served is the most confidential form of intimacy. So the whole problem, in a sense, is that we all think that we are masters, and therefore there's envy, there's hatred, and there's warfare. But when we realize that one is actually a servant instead of a master, then life becomes very pleasing, and all warfare and envy and mishaps and argumentation stops. People realize that they're all serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and one another. So Hare Krishna people have something to say about a lot of things. It's not just a cult or a religious tradition. It's a spiritual tradition based on love of God. It's a science of love of God. So, for example, people want a peace in the world. They want an end to warfare, which doesn't seem to happen. I mean, when the British left India, 1947, everyone, especially Gandhi, thought there was going to be a lot of peace in the world, but their fighting was going on, fighting between provinces, fighting between communists, fighting between Democrats. It continued. So the thing that we have to say about warfare is that we're all servants, and God is the supreme owner of everything. So why are we struggling and fighting over what we have stolen and what we claim to be our own? There's a saying in the United States that there's honesty among thieves. The story is that sometimes the thieves would get together after stealing something, and they would try to divide the booty among themselves honestly. Everyone would get an equal portion. One way to look at the world is that everyone is a thief. And if everyone is in that position of stealing the property of God, then there will never be peace. And even though there are many great attempts to stop warfare, it continues. But it can be stopped forever if one realizes who the supreme owner of everything is, and that is God. So the idea of Krishna consciousness is to bring God back into society. And then people are nowadays very concerned about pollution in water, pollution in air, pollution in the ground, and cruelty to animals. But all this is automatically stated in the scriptures of the Srimad Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita, that a learned person sees equally all things. Vidya Vinaya Sampane And raso varjam rasopias cha, that whether a person is an animal, whether a being is an animal or a human being, or a very low class human being or a very high class human being, he sees everything equally. And therefore there's a stop automatically. We not only love the animals, but we love the insects and the plants and everything. Because everything is a part and parcel of God or Krishna. This is not sectarian. This is not the province of Buddhists or Islamic peoples or Jewish people or Christians. It's a fact of life, and it's called devotional service. And if it's practiced uninterruptedly and faithfully, and one becomes a theist, then there's no warfare or conflict, and the environment, instead of being polluted by giant factories and various other means of people wanting more than they actually deserve, the world becomes the environment becomes one of natural feeling. And automatically a devotee is very kind to the environment in which we live. We're not, I think it's stated in the Ishopanishad that everything is the property of the Lord. It's in the first shloka. But what everyone wants is more than what one needs. And I think it's been said somewhere that the world has enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. I don't know who said that, but that Prabhupada was one person who may have quoted it. But it's necessary. Well, because we want more and more and more, and we're never satisfied. There will always be injustice. There will always be warfare. There will always be conflict. So this can be. This is one of the important things that the Krishna people have to say to the world. That we believe that God owns everything and that we own nothing. So that's one of the important things. And of course, there are many other issues of the day, like capital punishment and abortion, and devotees have opinions on those things that are based upon rational thought. Rational thought that includes godliness. Because people are very atheistic today, and putting God back in society is kind of frowned upon. But the science of God is different than the notion of God as most Christians and Jews and Islamic peoples think of God, as a force or an energy, or as an impersonal being that has no arms, legs, hands, eyes, or ears, and never eats. So anyway, these are some of the, I guess we have to stop now, but these are some of the issues that we can address and be meaningful people rather than just an offbeat sort of group of people that it's sort of ununderstandable or something like that. So any comments or questions on any of this or anything that's been said? Yes?
Thank you very much. I just comment that Bhakti Maharaj used to address the readers of his books with beloved, and can you share a little bit more about the intimacy in the service of the Lord between the beloved and the beloved? Can we talk more about that?
Well, you're asking me to talk more about the love servant, and
Please.
I think the main thing is that God is the owner of all, as it said in the fifth chapter, I think it's the last verse of Bhagavad Gita, Bhoktaram Jagatapasama, which is the peace formula, that God is the owner of everything. It said Sarvaloka Maheshwara, that God is the owner of everything, and everything that we have, nations, automobiles, airplanes, is stolen property, because it's not ours to begin with. And if we realize that, then there's no conflict, because we're all part of we're serving God, we're serving each other. So if God is brought back into society with knowledge, not just an ephemeral, ethereal, not ephemeral, but ethereal, incorrect notion of a supreme being, then there will be peace in the world. That's something that all of us, everyone is striving for, peace. And Prabhupada often commented that they call it an organization, the United Nations, but every year there's more and more flags flying. And the United Nations is very much involved in warfare. They have the UN written on tanks and weapons. It's very difficult. And a friend of mine who is a bit of a scholar, and kind of, but he was compliant with what the presidents and he was an American, and what the government told us what was happening. And one day he told me that he was going to India, and he had a stopover in Saigon, and in Saigon he saw pallets of missiles with USA flags written on them, and he got this realization: is the president of our country is lying to us? Because at that time it was someone who said that Vietnam is just a parking lot. We're not worried about it. But he came to this realization then. So there's a lot to be said for thinking God is the owner of everything, even though it's a very unpopular concept. But it's the way that people can achieve a real peace and happiness in the world.
Thank you very much.
I mean, I could speak about this for days and months and years, but that's, we don't have that kind of time.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes?
Many people have the sentiment that they want peace, but then they march off into McDonald's and eat the couch. And you were describing how the knowledge that God is provided for everything. How do we present that knowledge and encourage people to apply that knowledge, take advantage of the knowledge?
Well, we have to present things in a way in ways that are assimilable. If we talk about the proof is in the scriptures, it may not be acceptable. But if it's philosophical, if there's a philosophical type of understanding that we can adopt, then it's sometimes we have to really rack our brains to see how to approach atheistic people about God. And to think, and I think it was Hari Sori once that told me that even though the temple of the Vedic planetarium is a bastion of learning and it's a symbol of the universe being God-centered, that most people who will come to it will, at the most, we can hope for. And he's talking about getting screenwriters to write the narrative. Really, so it's a state-of-the-art kind of thing ultimately. He said that probably the best we can hope for is that people come away with the idea that these Krishna people, they have a genuine, they have something really. It's worth knowing about, even though we don't necessarily agree with them, but they're worth noting. That's what he thinks is the best thing we can hope for. Not that we're going to change people's minds, but that they can realize that we do have some relevant notions. Anyway, that's what he said.
Just interjecting there, Maharaj, I would say that's a precursor to changing their consciousness anyhow. Just that acknowledgement.
Well, when
these people have something that they, sorry for interjecting. You say you won't change their minds. I'm saying that'll be by nature. The precursors to change their minds. It's already happened once they have knowledge. Excuse me.
Well, we can be hopeful.
It's just a comment, sorry.
We can hope so. Okay, one more.
I was wondering, you were talking about how everything in the world belongs to Krishna. I was thinking, as well as all the living entities. And when we're talking about humanitarian subjects, maybe abortion or Black Lives Matter and things like that. I mean, as devotees, we have a higher understanding that everyone is the soul and that we should treat everyone equally. But I was wondering what our position as Vaishnavas is to be involved in helping people that are in need in that way, because there is that sense of we can give them philosophy, we can give them Krishna consciousness, but I mean, when there are people that are suffering, is it our duty to go above and beyond and go to these protests and go and help these people, or is it from a philosophical point of view, just to give them Krishna consciousness, which is the highest form of knowledge and stuff.
Well, if you say that people that die in a plane crash it happened because they deserve it, it sounds very callous. And in a way it is, because devotees are paradukha dukhi. They're supposed to be concerned about people's suffering, whatever it is. It's not always possible to explain those things, because they're very deep topics. I mean, the idea that we're a soul and not the body, even that is beyond most people's ability to understand, even though it's written in the Bhagavad Gita, Dehi no smin jata dehe. But that's the first, once we get past that first level, I think, that we're a soul and not the body, then it's possible to understand deeper and more important things. Otherwise, we can be seen as very callous to the world. And there's a sort of a New Age version of reincarnation that says, well, it doesn't matter about abortion because it's going to be born again anyway. So there's that thing, has to be taken into account. And I think Prabhupada once said that somewhere in the Bible, I think it's in Luke, that Jesus said that I have many things to say to you, but I'm not saying them now. Because his speech to his closest associates was different from what he said to the masses. So I think that's all we have time for. And thank you very much.
No, I heard it.